You are sitting in a room, and someone asks for a favor you absolutely do not have the time or energy to do. Your schedule is already full. Your stress levels are already peaking. But before you can even think, you hear yourself saying yes. You agree to take on the extra work. You smile and pretend it is no problem at all. You walk away feeling entirely drained, angry at the person who asked, and even more angry at yourself for agreeing. We've all been there. We sacrifice our own peace of mind to keep everyone else happy. We tell ourselves we're just being kind. We convince ourselves that being a good Christian means being perpetually available to whoever needs us. But accommodating every single request fails to be true kindness. It functions entirely as a defense mechanism. To stop this exhausting cycle, we have to look at what's actually happening in our brains when we abandon our own needs for someone else. This behavior doesn't appear out of thin air. It starts long before you ever say yes to that specific favor. Psychologist Dr. Harriet Breaker explains in her book, The Disease to Please, that this compulsive need to accommodate others is frequently rooted in childhood. She notes that many people grew up in environments where love and approval were highly conditional. You were praised when you met expectations, and you were ignored or criticized when you fell short. Therefore, your brain learned a very specific lesson. You learned that your core value as a human being depends entirely on how useful you are to the people around you. You learned that keeping the peace is the only way to stay safe. But operating from this baseline creates a massive problem in adulthood. Because you believe your worth is tied to other people being happy with you, you constantly scan the room for signs of disappointment. You become terrified of rejection. You assume that if you say no, you'll be cast out. This constant fear of rejection takes a very real psychological toll. Dr. Susan Newman, a social psychologist, details how chronic people pleasers inevitably experience high levels of anxiety, extreme stress, and severe burnout. She observes that people pleasers chronically overcommit. They completely neglect their own basic needs. Because you're ignoring your own limits, your body and mind eventually break down. You end up feeling deep resentment toward the very people you're trying so hard to please. You feel used, even though you're the one who volunteered your time. Therefore, the strategy of keeping everyone happy completely backfires. You don't build strong relationships. You build relationships based on a fake version of yourself, a version that never has a dissenting opinion or a personal boundary. This brings us to a harsh but necessary reality. This exhausting pursuit of validation ruins your mental health, but it also creates a massive spiritual roadblock. It directly conflicts with your faith. We often confuse people-pleasing with serving others, but they're driven by entirely different motives. Serving others is driven by love. People-pleasing is driven by fear. The Bible specifically warns us about this trap. In Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, the Apostle Paul writes, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ." This verse makes a very clear distinction. You can't serve two masters. If your primary goal in life is to manage everyone else's opinion of you, you aren't serving God. You're serving the crowd. So, if human approval is a trap that burns us out and separates us from God, how do we actually stop? You might think the answer is to just start being aggressive and saying no to everyone. But that approach fails almost immediately. If you try to force yourself to be rigid without changing your internal mindset, the guilt will eat you alive. You'll set a boundary, panic about the other person being mad at you, and instantly apologize and backtrack. This only works once you understand how to replace the validation you're desperately seeking from others. To stop needing everyone else to validate you, you have to learn how to validate yourself. Dr. Kristen Neff is a leading researcher on a concept known as self-compassion. In her research, she explains that treating ourselves with kindness and understanding directly reduces our need for external validation. When you make a mistake, or when you simply can't fulfill a request, your default reaction is likely harsh self-criticism. You tell yourself you're lazy or selfish. Because you're attacking yourself, you desperately need someone else to tell you that you're still a good person. But Dr. Neff found that when you respond to your own limitations with self-compassion, when you acknowledge that being human means having limits, you stabilize your own emotions. You no longer need the other person to tell you it's okay, because you've already accepted it yourself. Because you've established this internal baseline of self-compassion, you're finally ready to change your external behavior. You're ready to draw a line. Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend, in their book, Boundaries, emphasize that we must learn to say no to requests that conflict with our values or our well-being. They explain that a boundary is simply a property line. It defines where you end and someone else begins. Therefore, you aren't responsible for how another person reacts to your boundary. You're only responsible for communicating it honestly. If you politely decline a request and the other person becomes angry, that anger belongs to them. You don't have to absorb it. You don't have to fix it. This is a terrifying concept for a chronic people pleaser. We're so used to taking responsibility for everyone else's emotional state that letting someone be mad at us feels like a failure. But it isn't a failure. It's the beginning of actual freedom. This freedom only materializes when we know exactly how to speak up. Knowing you need a boundary is useless if you can't articulate it. Dr. Randy J. Putterson outlines practical strategies for this in his book, The Assertiveness Workbook. He notes that true assertiveness is about expressing your thoughts and needs respectfully without attacking the other person or shrinking yourself down. He recommends using a specific technique for these conversations. I call this the personal reality check, but psychologists formally refer to it as using I statements. Instead of blaming someone by saying they're demanding too much of you, you focus on your own reality. You say things like, I can't take on this project right now, or I feel overwhelmed when my schedule changes at the last minute. By centering the statement on your own capacity, you remove the accusation. You're simply stating a fact about your own limits. Therefore, you leave no room for debate. People can argue with an accusation, but they can't reasonably argue with a statement about your own personal capacity. As you start practicing these assertiveness techniques, you'll inevitably face moments of doubt. The fear of disappointing people will try to creep back in. When this happens, we have to anchor our psychology back into Scripture. We have to remember why we're setting these boundaries in the first place. We find a vital reminder in Proverbs, chapter 29, verse 25. The Scripture says, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. A snare is a trap designed to hold you hostage. When you obsess over what other people think of you, you're walking directly into a trap. You give away your agency, your time, and your peace. But trusting in God means trusting that His approval is the only approval that actually dictates your worth. Your value is inherent. You don't have to earn your place in this world by running yourself into the ground for everyone else. We break free from the trap of people-pleasing by recognizing the childhood roots of our fear, just as Dr. Breaker outlined. We break free by acknowledging the severe anxiety it causes us. We replace harsh self-criticism with the stabilizing self-compassion researched by Dr. Kristen Neff. We establish firm limits using the boundaries defined by Dr. Cloud and Dr. Townsend. And we communicate those limits with clear, respectful assertiveness. By doing this, we step out of the snare. We finally stop performing for the crowd, and we start living the authentic, purpose-driven life we were always meant to live.